I would like to welcome and thank our speaker for today, Dr. Robert DuPont. Dr. DuPont was the first director of the National Institute on Drug Abuse from 1973 to 78, and the second White House drug chief from 73 to 77. From 1968 to 1970, he was the director of community services for the District of Columbia Department of Corrections, and from 70 to 73, he served as administrator of the District of Columbia Narcotics Treatment Administration. In 1978, he became the founding president of the Institute for Behavioral Health Incorporated and has been clinical professor of psychiatry at the Georgetown University School of Medicine since 1980. He is a distinguished fellow at the American Society of Addiction Medicine and life fellow of the American Psychiatric Association. Dr. DuPont's signature role throughout his career has been to focus on the public health goal of reducing the use of illegal drugs. Please join me in welcoming Dr. DuPont today as he discusses what is the 5-year recovery standard.
Thank you very much. Well, I am just thrilled to be here. I am honored to be here. Introduction walking up here, I kind of thought I was going to be speaking for an hour or maybe 2, and I find out it's 3. Now, I don't know how you feel about that, but I'm happy about it. And it reminds me of an experience I had many years ago, because I've been in this field a long time. I'll tell you a little bit more about me in a minute, but this was the time I was invited to Boston to speak to a group at the Massachusetts state legislature, and I was introduced by the governor, who was named Michael Dukakis, who ran for president, and he was governor at that time. And I came in, I was the opening speaker, and I came and got there a few minutes early and sort of settling myself down, and I said, well, I don't really know the whole program, what's all going on today, and it kind of helps me to get an idea of what the context is. And he says, what do you mean about the program? I said, well, how do I fit in with the other speakers? He says, you're the only speaker. I said, well, it's 8:30 in the morning. He said, yes, we stop at 4:30. I had 10 minutes to think about how I was going to organize that day. So this is a piece of cake compared to that. Now, let me tell you a little bit about me. We got a bunch of slides here, but there's lots of time for talking after the slides, especially now. You heard a little bit about my background, but let me tell you a little more personal level. When I was a young guy and going off to college and medical school, I was inspired by 2 young people, Jack Kennedy and Martin Luther King Jr. They were inspiring me in terms of what I might do, and they were just very important. I never met Kennedy, but I did meet Martin Luther King Jr. And spent some time with him. And actually, I took off a year in medical school to drive a Land Rover through the continent of Africa for a year. And I had a letter from Martin Luther King Jr. introducing me to the continent of Africa, if you can imagine, as a medical student. So that was what I was. So when I finished my training, I went to the Harvard Medical School. I did my psychiatric residency at Harvard. I then went to NIH, which at the time was, as I say, much more competitive to get into than Harvard Medical School, because that was a time when every doctor had to serve 2 years of military service during the Vietnam War. And I went there in 1966. But anyway, so I finished that, and then the question was, at 32, well, what would I do? Now my training, the path is, I've just been on a path, pecking away, but now there's no path. So I had worked 1 day a week at a state prison in Massachusetts called the Norfolk Prison, which is a famous prison in a way. It's a maximum security facility, but it was the prison that Malcolm X served 6 years for a burglary charge. And I really, it sounds kind of odd, but I kind of fell in love with the prisoners. I went into psychiatry because of the stories. you know, modern psychiatrists just write prescriptions. You guys do the talking. That wasn't my game. I wanted to do the talking. I wanted to know the people. That was what was important to me, and their personal stories, not some statistic. And so I said, okay, how might I do something that could make a contribution to these people's needs? And I went to work at the District of Columbia Department of Corrections. Now, to say that they hadn't had previous graduates of Harvard Medical School from NIH come to work for the Department of Corrections would be kind of understating just how odd this personal choice was. But I got involved, and right away we had a crime epidemic in Washington that in 1968 led to the city being called the crime capital of the nation in that presidential election. And there was a crime commission appointed by Lyndon Johnson, who was then the president. And Nixon was coming in later in '69. And so there was a lot of focus on crime in Washington. And I got interested because I'm in the corrections in Washington, D.C. So the question was, why was there a crime epidemic? And I took my urine cups to the D.C. jail and took urine from everybody coming in. And what I found that 44% of them were positive for heroin. And when I put the year they first used heroin in that sample up against the crime rate, they had the same slope, same time. So that was published in the New England Journal of Medicine, which is a big deal, that study. And so the question then was, okay, you've identified the problem, what do you do about it? And so I was 32 at that time, so I set about learning about drug treatment. And at the time, there was a very big interest in therapeutic communities, Synanon being an example, but Phoenix House, Daytop, a lot of other ones, and methadone maintenance. And it looked to me like you couldn't do therapeutic communities on the scale of a big city. You could do that for a couple hundred people, but not for thousands and thousands in any kind of time frame. So the only option really was methadone. That would be a scale to the problem, and specific to the heroin problem. So I got to know Vincent Dole and Marie Neisminder, who started it. When he came to Washington, he stayed at my house, and I went to New York, I stayed at his house. And I started a very large program, as you heard, called the Narcotics Treatment Administration, that treated 15,000 heroin addicts in Washington in 3 years. And the crime rate in the city was cut in half. The heroin overdoses fell from 70 to 4. It was a dramatic example of a public health intervention to make a big difference in what was going on in the city. And we published 200 articles in that 3 years. I mean, there was a tremendous commitment to research involved in what we were doing. And it was in all the news and lots of media attention. We had a person who was hired just to take people around to our 20 centers to show them, I'm sure like you do here, when they come to visit. And they came from all over the world to see what we could do. And as a result of that, and my relationship with the White House, and you can imagine that President Nixon was quite interested in this, I became the White House drug czar and the head of NIDA, which is a big deal. And I was very happy about that, of course. And I learned a lot and got to travel all over the world to see drug treatment and all. Now, what's kind of interesting about that story is how I didn't get it about what was happening in Center City, Minnesota. That was completely off the radar for everything that I was doing. I didn't come here, I didn't know about it. I had no idea about the 12 steps, for example. That was completely, I mean, I heard of it, but the idea that it would be important in terms of a whole community, because I was thinking in public health terms, not for a small group of people, but for a whole community. So what happened to change that? Well, ever since 1968, I have had a private practice. And I have treated my own patients, not just administrators. There are pretty many people who do administration and do research and have a practice. But I have all the time and still do. And I learn more from my patients than any books or any study. And I had a patient who came in and sort of quizzed me about AA, and I didn't pass the quiz, and he said, you know, you need to learn more about that. And he said, that's how people really get well. Really? I was very interested in that. And about that time, I had a group of ex-addict advisors in my NTA program. And I had left then and gone on to the federal government long since. But one of them was retiring from a job, and I went to his retirement party. I asked him about the other people who had been our ex-addict advisors. Wonderful guys I was very close to them. They were all dead. And I said, well, what happened to them? I thought they relapsed to heroin. No, they all died of alcoholism. They all died of alcoholism. And I said, this guy's name was Knapp Turner, and I said, Knapp, how come you're alive and they're dead? And he said, I went to meetings and they didn't. Whoa. Those experiences made a big difference to me. And I got very interested in thinking about things in an entirely different way than I had started up. And I practiced in a different way. And I became very interested in what was going on. Now, I'm not going to connect all the dots because if you can do the math, it's 48 years I've been in the field. 48 years. So there's a lot of things that happen. But I want to jump ahead to about 10 years ago. Now I'm an old guy. I was an old guy 10 years ago. So I said, you know, this game is going to end. What can I do that could make a difference at this point in my life? And I thought, well, you know, one of the things I've learned about drug treatment is nobody much wants to do it because it's so discouraging. Because everybody relapses. And that's why doctors, you know, they see, oh, an addict, oh, why would I bother with that person? I mean, that's hopeless. Well, that's the sort of context we have. So I thought, okay, well, how good could outcomes really be? What is the benchmark? Well, now, I had at that point quite a few doctors with addiction in my practice. And I watched what happened to them. They all made it. So I said, what are they doing with those doctors? How's that happening? And so I started 10 years ago the first national study of the Physicians' Health Programs. They're all state programs. Each state has its own PhD. So we got a national study. You're going to see some data from that in a minute. We looked at that and found, as you'll see, some pretty wonderful results. And that led to 10 more papers that we published about that. And 2, what we're going to talk about here, the 5-year recovery stage. And my point about this is, and you'll see some things as I got a fair number of slides for us to look at, how I get here. But basically, the argument I'm making is that it takes time recovery is not a light switch. It's a long process that takes a lot of input into it. So what you're going to hear now is, I don't know, 30 slides. I'm going to take you through all this experience, fairly rapid pace, and we're going to, well, and then we'll have lots of time for questions. So let me see if I can get this right. So that's who I am, and here we are at the state. Aha, learning objectives. Number one, treatment is always short. The longest treatment is short. And the disease is for life. That's a problem. That's a problem. Doesn't matter how good the treatment is. The best treatment is still going to have a ton of failures and a ton of relapses because of the nature of the disease and this mismatch. Second thing we're going to do is we're going to summarize outcomes, what we learned from this study, from the PHP. And we're going to talk about how I got to 5 years. Where'd that come from? And then I want to talk about how to use this. What can happen, what can be done with the standard, why this standard is important. Okay, this is simple, you guys all know this. Most people with substance use disorders don't think they have a disorder and they don't want treatment. 90+%. My favorite statistic is this. You know how much drug users pay for drugs every year? $100 billion. You know what the entire treatment system of the country costs a year? $25 billion. The drug users could pay 4 times over for all the treatment in the country, never mind the government and health care. And that's all cash money. They're paying cash for that. $100 billion. That's important data, folks, about the priorities of drug users. I ain't making this stuff up. Most patients referred to treatment don't go. They don't show up. And when they do show up, they drop out. And if they complete the program, they relapse at very high rates. This is the reality we're all living with. Now, today's treatment paradigm, how treatment really works typically, although addiction is lifelong, treatment is standalone. It's not integrated within healthcare. It's an isolated activity somewhere else, and it's short. And in medication-assisted treatment, not here, but in MAT, it really focuses on just opiates. There are no opiate addicts that don't use other drugs. They do not exist. The idea that you've got a treatment for opiates and that that's going to help these people is very questionable. All my ex-addicts, they died of alcohol. They didn't die of opiate dependence. So that's pretty striking. And in treatment, I know this is hard for you to imagine here, most of the patients continue to use drugs and alcohol while they're in treatment. That's the reality right now. I know what you do is different, and we're going to talk about that, but that is the reality in treatment. Okay, here are the 3 missing elements. This is, in a way, kind of a summary of the whole talk, my whole message. The first thing is, what are we trying to achieve? Now, I am, what do they call it, bringing coals to Newcastle for this. But people who are running drug treatment in this country do not understand, pretty much anywhere but here and programs like it, that the goal of your treatment is long-term recovery, and the recovery includes no alcohol and other drug use. Now, when I say that to drug treatment professionals, They think I'm loony. What are you talking about? I mean, I don't understand that's ideal, they would say, but that's not realistic. Well, so what are they talking about? When they say evidence-based treatment, what do they mean? I'll tell you what they mean. They mean that while the people are taking the medicine, they have 20% or more reduction in HIV infections, in overdose deaths, and other complications, and opiate use. 20% or more reduction. That's evidence of success in treatment. Holy Toledo. But when somebody tells you evidence-based, that's what they mean. That's the way it really is. Okay, so the first thing is defining the goal. You have no idea how hard that is to do that. One of the leaders of our field said to me when I talked about this, he said, that may be all right for some people, Bob, but there are a lot of people who just can't get there. Really? I don't know any people like that. He knows a lot of them. And here we go. It's not just, and we're talking about this more, it's not just what happens in treatment. It's what happens when you leave treatment. And the key to sustained recovery is post-treatment monitoring and professional and peer support. It isn't about treatment alone. If a treatment is really wonderful, what it does is put the person on the path and explain the disease to them. That's it. No treatment ever fixed any addict. Zero. Including here. And then here's the third one. The people around that person have to demand that they not use. We're a long way from that. That's a tough sell. We can talk about that some more, but that's what happens with the PHPs, and I'm going to talk about how they do that. Okay, now here's something that is really a very big deal. Healthcare is going through a major transition. And what it's focused on is, in general, the chronic, serious illnesses. The most prevalent chronic serious illnesses. And what it's heading for is to prevent those, to identify them early, to intervene, and to keep monitoring the people with those diseases for life. Now you think about that. We aren't there, but that's where we're going. That's what the game is about. And what's happened with ACA and Parity is that it's opened doors that were not there before. And you think about that, if you had the healthcare people for our patients were engaged in monitoring their drug and alcohol use, the way they monitor the blood sugar or the A1C for diabetes for their lifetimes, that would change the game. That doesn't happen now. Okay, so we're just shifting from acute, limited programs to sustained care of the chronic illness. And this chronic care model is extremely important in terms of long-term accountability for the healthcare system. Doctors are judged now by how their patients do. We need to do that with addiction. And again, that comes back to the stable long-term recovery is what we're trying to get to. Okay, from the PHPs, what do they do? Physicians come into the program in a bad way. Something bad has happened. They've been identified as using drugs in their work. They've had a DUI. their spouse has come and reported them to the board. Something has happened. There's been a crisis. And that comes to the attention of the licensure board, and it threatens the doctor's license. Now, whether the doctor knows that at the start, and sometimes they do and sometimes they don't, but that's always in the background. Because the key is the licensing board. That's separate. The PHPs are not licensing board. That's an entirely separate activity in this. And so when they come, they're scared, but they're in denial, and they don't think they have a problem. Or if they do, it's minor and they can take care of it by themselves. But they have to sign a contract. And the contract says you're going to be monitored for any alcohol or drug use for 5 years. Any use, you will be taken out of your practice. Right then. Every day when you get up, you have to go online and see if you need to be drug tested or call a number. And if you don't show up, it'll be considered a positive test. Every day. For 5 years. But that isn't all. You're going to go to meetings. Lots and lots of meetings for all of the 5 years. And have a sponsor. And that'll be monitored. Now, one of my colleagues who helped me on this study said to me, no sane person would sign that contract, let alone an addict. I said, that's right, but and here's the other thing, the PHPs have no punishment. They cannot punish anybody. They have no leverage. But the PHPs give the doctor a safe harbor from the licensing. And so if they leave the PHP, they lose the safe harbor. And they roll the dice, see what happens. So the PHPs, look, this is voluntary. You don't have to stay in the PHP. Take your chances, see how you do. They don't want to do that. Because that safe harbor tells the board they're not using, and they're compliant with the program. And that's very valuable to the doctors in this. Okay. And here I've talked about this a little bit, how they do this. First of all is zero tolerance. Any drug that is not prescribed. They start with an evaluation. Now that's a very important point. Just because a doctor has a complaint doesn't mean he or she has to sign this contract. They have to get evaluated, is what happens. And if the evaluation says it was a minor incident and they don't really have a problem, they're not in the PHP. But if it's a pattern and they diagnose it with a substance use disorder, yes, they are. So the first step is an evaluation, and it's a very serious evaluation, and the intervention. And then the monitoring contract, and it's for 5 years, I think I mentioned that. And it goes like this. When they start, they all have to go into treatment. The standard treatment is 30 to 90 days of residential care. But there are exceptions. And some are in IOP and other kinds of arrangements. But mostly it's 30 to 90 days of residential for what happens. And then, now think about this. People say, one person, I was a leader in our field, I said, you know, the PHPs are everybody, and he said, well, that's not important. They have 5 years of treatment. They don't have 5 years of treatment. They have a month or 2 or 3 of treatment in 5 years. Treatment is a little tiny part of the time that they have. But then they have the long-term monitoring and support. And that support word is really important because when problems come up, there's a serious effort made to deal with those problems. Anxiety problems, marital problems, financial problems, whatever it is. Those PHPs are really into this thing. Okay, now I'm going to talk about the results. But before I do that, let me tell you about, first of all, this model is unique. Now it's also for commercial pilots and lawyers. I'm not saying it's only, but it's so different from how all other addicted people are handled. It's an entirely different, I call it different paradigm to look at that. How did this happen? How come this has happened like this? And the answer is very interesting. This movement grew out of the employee assistance movement in workplaces. And the employee assistance program grew out of AA and NA. So many of these doctors who run these programs have been in recovery themselves. And it's very interesting to think about that. One of them said to me, I said, how did you ever get this idea to do this? You know, and he said, well, I've seen a lot of doctors, and the only way to get their attention is with a baseball bat, and one hit to the head is probably not enough. And I know that because that was me. And that inspiration is really important to think about. These are people who walk the walk, and they want to get people into it. And they're serious about it. Okay, now first of all, I've got data on just one exposure. It's the equivalent of one time in treatment. So this is not the lifetime of what happens to these doctors. This is just a single episode of treatment. Okay, 64% completed the contract and 16% extended. That means they stayed with the program. 19% failed to complete the full 5 years of the contract at some point along the way. So roughly a fifth of them did. Now most of those people are going to come back like you would do in treatment. So this is not the end of the story for these people, but this is just this one episode of care. Okay, and they're back practicing medicine, and we're drug and alcohol free for that period of time. 78% were licensed, 4% had retired or left practice, 11% had their license revoked, 3% unknown status. That's a pretty good outcome for 5 years. Okay, but here's one that just is stunning. These folks have to be drug tested for 5 years on a random basis. Okay, 78% of them had not one single missed or positive test in 5 years. You think about that. How many samples do you know like that? And of the people who had any positive test, 22%, half never had a second positive test. 14% never had a second positive test. That's pretty amazing when you're monitoring people that aggressively for that long. Think about that. Okay, now this is something that has not been published, but we're doing it now. So the question comes up, somebody says to me, well, Bob, you know, that's nice, but that's just while they're being monitored. What happens when they're not monitored? What happens after the monitoring ends? Okay, so we did a study of people who had successfully completed. Now, this wasn't all the people who entered. This was a sample of people who successfully completed the 5-year program. And the question was it sustained or not? That was the question. Okay. So we did that, and here's the results of that. 89% reported completing their contract without a relapse during the monitoring. 96% of these people were in recovery 5 years after mandatory monitoring stopped. 5 years. They're the people you know. You see them as doctors. This is not rare. They're all around us if we'll look at it. Okay, but 96% of them in recovery. So we asked them, what was the most important thing to you in your recovery? You're not going to be surprised by this. Number one, and they only could choose one. So they had a long list, but they didn't get to list 3. They just had to choose one. Okay, 35% chose 12-step meetings. That's not surprising. But what's stunning is treatment was 26%. Now they only had 30 days of treatment in 5 years. And this was 5 years before we started. So in the past 10 years, they had 30 days of treatment, and they still, 26% said it was the most important. That shows you how important treatment is in terms of long term. Even though it wasn't very long, it made an enormous difference to them. I tell a little personal story. I was talking about the doctors that I've worked with. This was happened 10 years ago. I had 2 doctors come in at the same, within a few weeks of each other. And they bracket what the experience is with drug users, never mind doctors, just drug users. So the first one I'm going to tell you about was a guy who came in, his psychiatrist had referred him to me. He said, I'm here because my doctor wasn't, my psychiatrist wasn't comfortable dealing with alcohol problems. And he said, you could do that. I said, well, that's fine, I'll be happy to do that. And I talked to him a little bit, and I said, we talked about his drinking and all. I said, well, would it offend you, doctor, if I said you were an alcoholic? He said, oh no, that's why I'm here. I said, well, that's 80% of what we need to accomplish has just been accomplished. This is wonderful. I said, now, doctor, what is the treatment for alcoholism? He says, I have no idea. That's why I came to you. I said, well, it kind of depends. I tell you what, let's do. Have you ever been to an AA meeting? No. No idea what AA was. I said, well, why don't we start with some meetings? And the sort of standard way to do it is 90 meetings in 90 days. And we're going to see how you do. I don't know what's going to happen, but we'll just see. Well, it was like teaching a duck how to swim. The guy just found himself, he threw himself into this, he never had another drink. He became an AA Nazi. He's become a member of the American Society of Addiction Medicine. I mean, his life was transformed by this brilliant doctor who said, go to meetings. Okay. The other doctor, equally proficient, both of them about 50 years old, maybe 45. He comes in and he's works with people with pain, and so he's got a lot of opiates around, and from the patients, because the families will bring him in and dump them on his desk when they die, and he's got a serious problem with opiates. Now, I referred him to meetings too, and he kind of liked the meetings, but it didn't really take. And we went through 3 of the best treatment programs in the country. He was thrown out of every one of them. He didn't just drop out. He was non-compliant. He was getting involved with the female patients. I mean, he just was a troublemaker in the treatment programs and was thrown out. So he kept using. He lost his wife and his 4 kids. He lost his license. He spent every penny of his retirement money. He had a car, and then he lost his car, and then he had a bike, and his bike got stolen. And then he was homeless. And now, I knew his parents, so I'd call his mother from time to time, how's he doing? Terrible, terrible, terrible. And then one night she said, oh, he's turned the corner. How can that be? He turned himself in to the city government homeless program for addicts. 5 years later, we got involved in the Physicians Health Program. 5 years later, he got his license back. And now, 10 years after that, he's practicing. Now, those are both happy stories, but a very different path that they took. And you couldn't really tell that when they first came in, what was going to happen. But that's the way that goes. Okay, 96% reported license to practice. Now, what about medications in the PHBs? Well, essentially 0. The doctors, half of the doctors were alcohol, and 1/3 were opiates, and 1/6 was anything else. So it's mostly alcohol and opiates, the doctors are. And the alcohol is more, but not a whole lot more than the opiates. The opiates are very common among the physicians. And these patients with opiate dependence, doctors, did exactly as well as the alcoholics or the other drug users. They did not have any worse outcomes. They all had stupendously good outcomes. Now, here's a quote down at the bottom, this Betty Ford consensus panel. I don't know how many of you have ever seen that, but there's the kind of question, what does recovery mean? It's clear what it means to all of you, and it means that to me too, but out in the world, that ain't true. The word recovery means all kinds of things to a lot of people, including in the drug abuse field. And a lot of people will call recovery just anything better than they were before. They'll call it recovery. And I go crazy when people do that because it isn't what it means to me. So we got this panel together, which I was part of, and we came at this voluntarily maintained lifestyle composed of and characterized by sobriety, personal health, and citizenship. The idea is it requires abstinence, but it's more than abstinence. You all know that, but out in the world, they don't know that. That's not the way people think about it. So what I'm saying is that we want to judge all treatment programs, all treatment programs. Hazelden Betty Ford, methadone maintenance, Suboxone, all treatment, detox, any treatment, judged by how successful it is at achieving 5-year recovery. Okay? And what I want to do is have everybody do that routinely and report it to the public. So when patients come in, here's our track record. And it doesn't matter whether you use medicine or not. We can talk about what you're doing here with medicine. That's very exciting. But it doesn't matter. It's the same thing whether you use medicine or not. That's your goal. Now there's a little twist here. And that is that some people on our side of the big divide in treatment think that if you're taking methadone or buprenorphine, but not naltrexone, you're not in recovery. I don't agree with that. As far as I'm concerned, if the patient is taking methadone or buprenorphine, and they're not using any drug non-medically, and they're taking it the way they're prescribed, they still can be in recovery. I worked with a methadone program, and 2/3 of the patients were going to meetings in the methadone program. And the people who ran the methadone program didn't know that. They were amazed when I told them that. And I said, well, how did they get into the program? And they did a little inspection, and it turned out the guy who was collecting the urine was in NA. So when they would come in and pee, he would talk to them about their meeting schedule. They never knew that was happening in the program. So I think for us on our side, it's very important that we not get ourselves all up that if they're taking methadone, if they're taking buprenorphine, they can't be in recovery. I know there are people who think that. That is self-destructive. This is not helpful. But many of those people who are taking methadone and buprenorphine are still using alcohol and drugs. That's what disqualifies them, not the methadone or buprenorphine. That's a really big deal to think about this. And what this will do will let all the treatment programs come into a level playing field. And it'll do something else. It'll get everybody in treatment to think about what happens when the people leave here. Because they're going to be judged on that. That's going to mean people are going to rethink what treatment is. Now this is a long quote. Have any of you ever heard of George Valiant? Even one person? He spoke here. I'm not surprised. He's a hero in our field. He's a great man. And he started, how he got into our field was when he was in the public health service, he was sent to Lexington, Kentucky, which was, they call it the narcotics farm of the public health service. And he did an initial study of 100 heroin addicts who were sent to this farm for a year, a prison kind of farm, and what happened to them left. Of course, they all relapsed. But that got him interested in follow-up studies, and he's become the dean of follow-up studies. And what he did was pick up a thing called the Grant study, which was, if you can imagine this, the W.T. Grant, who had the 10-cent stores, gave a lot of money to find out, sort of like I did, what's the best outcome you can get from college kids. And so what he did, God bless him, was went to Harvard College and picked out the top male students in the 1940 and 41 classes at Harvard. It was all male at that point. And these people became a group to be studied for the next 80 years, 70 years. What the people who started the study didn't think about is all the researchers were going to age out. Not only the patients were going to age, but the researchers were, so they were all dead. The people who started, and George Vaillant picked it up and made it his study. And one of the people who was in his sample was John F. Kennedy, which is kind of interesting. Now, he makes clear, he said, I took him out of the sample. We didn't include him in what we were looking at. But anyway, here's what he said about this. Another question is how long abstinence or return to controlled drinking, and here you put that in there. Just think about not having a problem. Must persist before an individual's recovery from alcohol can be considered secure. In smoking and even in cancer, remission must usually endure for 5 years before relapse is considered unlikely. In alcohol treatment studies, however, the investigators often speak about recovery after a drinker has been symptom-free for 6 months or a year. The Harvard study of adult development, which I just described, demonstrates that such short time frame is not realistic. Only after 5 years of abstinence can remission from alcoholism be regarded as secure. As with smoking, the remitted alcohol can almost never return to social drinking. Now, that's a very clear statement. And again, I love it because we're used to thinking of 5-year cure in terms of cancer too. So it has a kind of ring to it that I like, but it's long enough to have some stability. Okay. We talked about this before, getting it into practice. The first thing, and really the toughest part, is defining the goal of treatment from day one. So everybody who comes into treatment learns, here's what we're after. Now, here's a big mismatch. Almost nobody who comes to Hazelden will sign that contract. Almost no families will sign that contract. Why is that? Because they haven't figured it out. They think they're going to get fixed. They're going to give you the money, and they're going to come out, and they're done. That's what they all think. And Marv Sepple was talking about the Core 12 program. They were talking about 18 months. Nobody would sign up for 18 months. You can't sell it because people don't want it. You know, the families feel like, well, I gave them to you. You're supposed to fix them. You're the answer here. What do you want me to do? Well, there's some serious education needs to go on about what we're actually dealing with. No alcohol and drug use. How are you going to sell that to your patients? That's pretty hard to sell. You kind of have to seduce them because they're not going to agree to that, most of them. Or going to meetings for the next 5 years. That's another hard sell you're talking about. But it also includes routine follow-up after treatment and public reporting of the treatment's results. Okay, so you say, but, Bob, you got leverage in the PHP. Where's the leverage outside of the PHP? One of the things that I think is very interesting, I want to talk to you all about this, is the role of families in this. Because that's very controversial. Think about that. I saw some of you shaking your heads about things I was saying about families a little while ago. The sort of Al-Anon approach is you didn't cause it, you can't cure it, you can't control it, and so you detach with love. Well, that's one option. That's especially problematic when you talk about kids. But I'm not sure that's enough for the families to do. But the idea of what do they do and how do they exercise leverage, I think is worthy of a lot of consideration. But the reality is that almost every addict is in a family, and the families have potential for lots of leverage. But there's a big education job. Okay, what about health care employers, the criminal justice system. There's leverage everywhere in there. Once you get the goals straight. But that's a big deal. And then you see down here, nearly all addicted patients initially object to the standard. And I'm gonna show you some things about what happens to these physicians, what they think after they've been through this. Okay, research is needed to test a variety of models. How do you assess this? And I looked at several ways of doing it, and one of the things that I'm coming to you, to Hazelton, to encourage Hazelton to do some pioneering work, not just in medication for opiate dependence, but also in terms of how to do this on a systematic basis. And that's my agenda. And my line that I use for the PHPs is that they make, that paradigm makes long-term recovery the expected outcome of treatment, not relapse, which is what is now. Future challenges, make recovery not relapse the expected outcome. Healthcare reform gives us a lot of hope in this. This PHP model, you know, I think it's saleable to say, why do we limit these benefits to just physicians? If you had physicians with heart attacks and they had, you know, 5 times the success of other people, you'd want to pay attention to that. You wouldn't say, oh, that's just physicians. And this shows what this biological disease, how good it can get, and how to do it, I think. Okay, for 60 years ago, Hazelton created the modern drug treatment. And here's my simple-minded way of thinking about what Hazelton did, was it linked the 12 steps to healthcare in a program that had both. And we can talk some more about that history. I had some experience with that, and I'd be happy to talk about that. Now, what you're doing with medications is a very big deal. And let me tell you something that I bet you haven't thought about. Hazelton is using naltrexone or buprenorphine and not methadone, because methadone would require you to set up a whole program. You don't want to do that. But you can do the buprenorphine and the naltrexone, and that's a great thing, and that's wonderful. That's a big deal. But you say, well, lots of other people have been doing that too, outside of Hazelton. Why is this different? Well, one thing is, it brings the use of medications into a recovery-oriented AA and NA program. That's a big deal, because there's always been a war, so it brings it in. That's a big deal. But here's the bigger deal. You're using medications in the context of a zero-tolerance program. What's happening to everybody else out there who's using medication? They're in a harm reduction program. They're in a program that tolerates continued drug and alcohol use. All of them. The really big thing you've done is bring it into a no-use program. That is huge. That is huge. And that also has not only a message for other abstinence-oriented, AA, NA-oriented programs, where the lesson is very important, but it's a lesson for the MAT programs, that they can aspire to something higher. That's a very big deal. And what I want to do is that last one, pioneer in this 5-year recovery. I thought I had these slides, and I guess not. Some quotes from the people who were in the follow-up, still 5 years after the mandatory testing stopped. And what was very interesting was how they all felt that this had saved their lives. You talk about grateful addicts. These were grateful addicts. And they were all very clear that they didn't want to do it. They didn't think they needed it. And they certainly didn't need this long and expensive treatment. They got the message, just give me the testing. We asked them, well, what would you have done if you just had the testing and no treatment? 79% said they would have failed. It's pretty striking. But that whole issue about how the drug addict, when he's using, is a different person than that drug addict when he's in recovery. It's the same body, but it's an entirely different mind. And that's a huge deal because of the coercion involved. You don't say to the doctors, do you think you need treatment? How about trying this? Remember the baseball bat? Well, I think there's a lesson there. And I think going at it the other way is fraught with failures. Now, are there people who go through a 30-day program or whatever and come out and never use again? Absolutely. So the idea that everybody relapses is completely wrong. And what we're doing is wonderful. It's a question not is it wonderful or not, is it can be made wonderful for more people? That's the question. Okay, let me just see, I got a couple things here to show you also. Here's my organization, the Institute for Behavior and Health, IBH, and our websites. You're welcome to look at any of that. Basically what we are is a think tank of ideas about addiction. So we've got a whole series of ideas, of which this is right at the top. Okay. Now it's your turn. So who would like to start us off? You can also say you don't agree with anything I said. That's okay. But I think it's also not used very much. I don't think they do anything. So let me give you an example of family. It's having a recovery coach. So the family contracts with a recovery coach to have mandatory testing. And the family has consequences for a missed test or a positive test, just like the physician's health do. So there's a contract. You've got somebody in the game that is working with them to do that. It's not just they're doing it. They're hiring this expertise. I think that's one way to do it. But they need to get it through their heads that the person is going to, go back to using the lie, the cheat. I mean, all what drug addicts do. And the families are complicit in it, and their default option is to quit, and that's not good. But the other place is employers, to get employers to condition continued work. Now the reason it doesn't work as well for other employment situations is it's awful easy for the drug addict just to go to another company. The physician can't go anywhere else because that license is locked now. They can't move to California. But if you're and the same thing is true, by the way, of pilots and lawyers. But if you're a terrific salesperson and your employer says you have to do this or you're out of here, they're likely to go to the competitor and do a great job for him or her. So it's a tougher thing. But my favorite place to go is the criminal justice system, where I started my career. We've got 5 million people on probation and parole in this country. 75% of them have drug and alcohol problems. Man, that's a pretty big target to shoot at. And then you've got some leverage to use. But the big one, the biggest one, is further down the road, and that is healthcare. If you could just get healthcare to decide that once this person goes for treatment, they're going to be monitored forever. Just like they would for a serious illness with heart disease or something else. That would change the game. That would change the game. Now, most of my physician friends don't like that idea. And what they say is, look, if a diabetic doesn't take the drugs and follow the diet, we don't send them to jail. We don't deny them care. The heart attack person continues to smoke, we'll treat the next heart attack. Now, one of my colleagues said to me about that contrast, he said, you know, that person is saying it as if, well, we ought to treat addicts like we do the diabetics, but I say we should treat the diabetics like we do the addicts. That's a shift in the paradigm. I don't know where that's going to go, but there's a place for it, I think. But anyway, I think just having the families think about it and think about the question, and I think that there's, what I like to say about the drug problem is a piece of persons. You don't have to get it right the first time, because it's going to keep coming back. You're going to have lots of time to figure this out. So I want to plant this idea in your mind. And you can try it by trusting without the test. And let's see if it works. And if it does, that's great. Everybody wins. Nobody's happier than me if that works. But I've seen a lot of people where it doesn't work. And so maybe you'll talk to me the next time about it. And really, I think that the health payers, the people who are paying for it, whether that's the family or health insurance, need to be concerned about this. That cycling people through treatment over and over again is not a best use of resources, and it leaves the person at tremendous risk. Well, I think that the only way that's going to happen is to convince them that it's in their financial interest to do that.
Which it is, but it's hard.
Well, I don't know for sure about that. I think we all think so, but you know, it's expensive for them too to go into that. And I think they could easily get into a situation where the programs that were doing the monitoring weren't doing a great job, and I'm not sure they would get a good result. I mean, I don't know about that. These PHPs are pretty aggressive about it. I think that's to be determined. But I think put that model out there and let people see it and watch what happens. I don't think, probably none of you saw this article, but the Washington Post had an article about a month ago, and the headline was, "How's Amanda?" Did anybody read that? Does it mean anything to you? How's Amanda? It's a question. It's about a story about a 30-year-old heroin addict named Amanda. You look it up in the Washington Post about a month ago. Okay, that's the title, How's Amanda? And it's an amazing piece of journalism. This journalist spent, I don't know, 6 months with Amanda and her mother, whose name was Libby, and watched what happened as she went in and out of treatment programs and lied and cheated and did all kinds of things. And the way it ended, it was amazing, because the mother just wouldn't let go of Amanda. She was going to save Amanda. And she was just, you know, things were stolen from the home, and oh my God, the things that happened were, you know, horrendous. But she kept in there. And then Amanda came up with this idea that the answer really for her was naltrexone. You guys all know what naltrexone is. You implant it, it's for a month. And what it does is it blocks the opiate effect. But you have to use it for somebody who's not dependent when they get it, because it causes a withdrawal. So anyway, Amanda and her mother had become convinced that this is going to be her salvation. Okay, so she signs up for an appointment, and the mother, you know, has to keep her together, and she's got to stay clean for 2 weeks, and here's this date. So the date comes, and Amanda says, oh, she got a call from them, and they had lost the paperwork, and she's lost her place in line. She's got to do it next week. Well, I said, okay, well, we'll go back next week. And then she's working again to keep Amanda straight and all this kind of stuff. So the time comes to go, and Amanda comes to her and on the way to go there, and she said, well, I'm not completely clean, and they're going to take a drug test when I go there. So could you give me some clean urine that I can give them? So the mommy does. So they go to the program, and she comes in, and they take the urine and all this stuff, and they implant it. So the mother's really happy, Amanda's really happy. They go out the door, they get in the car, they go about 4 blocks, and she goes into the worst withdrawal of her life. So the thing ends by driving Amanda to the emergency room. And I think, okay, that's where that is. And think about the family. Think about Amanda's mom. And who's helping her? Who has any advice? One of the things that we have done at IBH is we've looked at all the big websites for families about what to do about a drug problem. If you have somebody in your family who has a drug problem, what do I do about it? So we looked at 25 different websites. Lots of the biggest ones in the country. Do you know what they say? It's really interesting. They say take him to treatment. Not a word in any of them about relapse. Not a word in any of them about going to treatment program after treatment program. Nothing about how to handle a relapse. And I'm thinking, that's really interesting. That as far as we can get with families is take them to treatment. That isn't very helpful. We know that. But so what I want you to think about, not ask me, you ask me, you think I'm the expert. You're the expert. Tell me, what do we need to tell those families about? What do we need to tell Libby about Amanda? And thousands like her. Thousands like her. What do we do with those families? Because I don't think it's a simple thing what to do about it. Anyway, I'm interested in your thoughts about that. That's what I was talking about. So you say from day one, here's the deal.
Yes.
You're not going to get fixed.
Right.
You're not going to come out of here fixed.
Right.
We can put you on a path, but you have to earn recovery.
Right.
That's a wonderful way to do it. But what do you tell the parents about the relapse? You say, okay, now, the odds are that this person, 50% of the people, I don't know, or some number like that, 70% are going to relapse in the first year. What do you do then? Bring them back to you, right? What else would they do? Well, but the other thing to say about the relapse is that that's more education.
Yeah.
That's
absolutely.
valuable information.
Absolutely.
Don't write off the relapse. That's a very important part of this whole process. I'll give you a little story from my practice. This happened 2 weeks ago. So a 50-year-old lady, is that right? 45 or 50, comes in and never seen her before. Alcohol problem, never been in treatment. What's she here for? Her family's gone. What do you mean your family's gone? She said, well, my husband has moved out with our 2 sons. Really? How did that happen? She said, a year ago, they had an intervention. And they said she had to shape up or they were going to leave. And she didn't. And they left. And she's motivated now to get them back. But she did nothing. I said, but you didn't think they would do it? Well, she didn't really think about it. But that was a pretty dramatic move. And she's not at all sure they're going to come back even if she gets into recovery. She has no guarantee. They never told her, we'll be back. We'll make a decision, is what they've said. Well, that was pretty dramatic. And it wasn't just a kid. But to say, you think about what they had to do. They had to rent a house. She's now living in the home alone. That was a family intervention that actually at least got her in my office. All of them had completed the contract successfully. The only people in the study were people, but 89% was people who didn't have a relapse.
Okay.
You had people who had a relapse, but they stayed with it. And they didn't leave, but they had a relapse. So 89% or 86, but I don't remember exactly, had no relapse.
Okay,
In
and
that.
96% of
We're in,
all
of the whole
people in
group
the
of the
study.
people,
So even if they had a relapse,
they,
they might have.
but yes, they were at the time of the follow-up 5 years after mandatory testing stopped, they were in recovery.
And what about?
And going to meetings, oh, that's another thing. 88% went to meetings after the testing and monitoring stopped, and 68% were going regularly at the end of 5 years. Not everybody continued to go to meetings, but most of them did.
And then as far as the other elements that they thought were important, you know, in terms of, you said 35% said 12-step attendance. Some others said treatment was the most.
26%, that number I
Yeah.
remember.
Right, but what other things then?
Oh,
Because that's
the
not
monitoring,
everybody.
the monitoring, monitoring their practice, dealing with their families, treating comorbid conditions. There was a long list of things that they could choose from.
So there may be other things that play a role.
Oh,
as well.
absolutely, for different people. Oh, it wasn't all the same for everybody, absolutely not. I was just struck by how much they thought treatment was important to them, even though it's, 30 days out of 5 years. And I think that that's right, because what treatment is, when treatment is good, is it gets inside the person's head. They're thinking different things as a result of the treatment. And the problem with it is, when they go out, they're awful subject to the denial coming back. I'm fine now. I don't need this anymore. It's not that they want to go back to using, but they're let down their guard and they drift back. My book is called The Selfish Brain. And so I think that the selfish brain is the addicted brain, and it takes over the person's thinking. I don't know whether you all know this. Let me tell you another story. The physicians' health programs are beleaguered. In this room right now, I think, and I think most of you probably think, they're wonderful. But not everybody thinks they're wonderful. And they're completely contrary to the public attitude about coercion. These people are forced in against their will, forced to spend money on treatment, because it costs them a lot of money for the treatment usually. And all the people, not all, almost all, are mad about it. They hire lawyers, they're gonna fight you about it, and there's a big body of opinion that the physicians' health programs are, well, one of the bad things about the programs is they're connected to AA and NA. And there's a big body of opinion that AA and NA are irrational. That was what the New Yorker had an article about it, the irrationality of AA and NA. But there's a whole lot of people like that who really think that we're somehow involved in a cult. That it's old-fashioned. Did you have Smart Recovery here?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I was reading a statement from somebody in Smart Recovery about how he likes that because it's not religious. Now, we don't think AA is religious, but he thinks AA is religious. So that was good, and it was old-fashioned thinking. Why anybody would start a meeting by reading from the big book was offensive to him. Those are ideas from people who had no training, had no scientific knowledge. And why in the world, in 2016, would you treat somebody with ideas that were that antiquated? And Smart Recovery doesn't do that. It was very interesting. Here he found people who were educated as opposed to uneducated. And I was just amazed. The one thing he said about AA, though, was interesting. He still goes to meetings, and he said the reason is because there's so many of them. And there aren't very many smart recoveries. And so I say to my patients, I say, geez, really, is that true? There's a lot of this, and there's not many of that. Do you think there might be some reason for that? And what do you think it might be? Maybe the government is paying people to go to AA meetings, or what do you think? I mean, why do people do that and do it year after year? Well, what the PHPs do, by the way, the PHPs have got a legal problem with requiring AA and NA. And so they say community support.
Yeah.
So it's 98% AA and NA.
Yeah.
But for the guy who's really pushes into the wall, they'll do smart recovery. Because they've got to do that. They can't, because it's you know, the courts have said that's a religion you're forcing them into. And you can't do that. So we all need to have smart recovery out there to make what we're doing acceptable. I think that's right. Other thoughts? Yes?
I really appreciated what you said about relapse and it being a learning experience. It's crazy to me how it's the overwhelming majority of the people, that's their experience that happens. And even in the rooms, they say the most important person in the room is the newcomer. So.
Exactly.
But that's not what happens. The guy with the 30 years gets the loudest clap, where the guy who's had repeated relapses, who has enough courage to go back. Frankly, I've got more respect for those people than the people, and you know, the people that just keep coming, you know, no matter what. And I think it goes a long way. And touching upon what you mentioned before about, you know, who's going to pay for this, it's mind-boggling how corporate America, you think Fortune 1000, I mean, I was involved with this program here where they monitored for 18 months. What company wouldn't want to do that? Okay, here's accountability. No, we're not going to send you off to treatment so you're missing work all this time over and over again. Here, this is what you're going to do. And then if that person does relapse, meet them where they are. As long as the channels of communication are still going on, it's a success. It's a success, pardon my language.
No, I think that that's all very good. One of the, do you remember that I started my career in the DC government with drug tests? Remember I went to the DC jail? So somebody said, Bob DuPont has never seen a drug test he doesn't like. And I think that's right. Sort of drug testing has been central to my entire career. I write the chapter in the ASAM textbook about drug testing, for example. That's not an accident. So I'm really into the drug test because the drug test is an objective assessment. You know, like the A1C or the blood sugar or blood pressure are objective things for us to look at. So I think that that's right. And one of the things that's very interesting, there's a lot of people who really are down on drug tests. I mean, the ACLU has made it a very big deal. I got involved in, I was, well, I'll tell you one more story, personal story. I was very involved in the 1980s with bringing drug testing to the workplace. That was a very big deal. That's when the DOT regulations came out and all this stuff happened at a particular time. We could talk about how that happened, but anyhow, it did happen at that time. And there were a lot of controversies about what to do about it. Well, one of the things that interested me is why don't we test kids? Why don't schools test people? Pretty shocking. So I got very interested in what's called student drug testing. And just like going to work, you go to school, you get a drug test. Makes sense to me, and I encourage people around the country to do this. Well, the lawsuits against that were tremendous. Texas picked it up, mostly conservative areas picked it up. Texas picked it up, wiped them out. The ACLU wiped them out. But there was one state where they didn't wipe them out, and that was Indiana. And Indiana had a different idea. They said, okay, we won't test everybody, we'll just test student athletes. The Olympics test athletes, why can't we test athletes? And then the thing that was interesting, and you brought this up about, it's not a question whether you test, it's what do you do with the result? That's what the issue is. So when I was going to the schools, the last thing I wanted to do was put the kid out of school. It's drugs that take people out of school, not drug tests that take them out of school. Drug tests keep them in school. I mean, that was my point of view about this. So the last thing you would do was have them go out of school for a drug test. Everybody knew that. That was not controversial. Everybody agreed with that. But that didn't matter to the ACLU, and they went after it. But in Indiana, they lost the case at the district court level. And so Indiana was permitted to do student drug testing. Well, that was a big deal. So other schools around the country picked this up. And a school system in the state of Oregon, in a little town called Vernonia, sort of like Center City, it's that kind of size town, did drug testing. And the ACLU picked that case. So there's a big court hearing. In Vernonia School, they hired me to be their expert. So I didn't ever go there, but I did it over the phone as an expert in this case. That case went to the U.S. Supreme Court. The only time I've ever had it sitting at the Supreme Court. And we won 6-3. That was a big deal. Now the tide has turned about student drug testing. And so the next iteration was some schools in Oklahoma decided to test everybody with extracurricular activities. Yes, athletics, but the debate club, the band, any extracurricular activities. And the penalty for a positive test was they had their parents involved in it, and they had to have a negative test before they could do the extracurricular activities again. That was the punishment. So the ACLU went after it again. And I wasn't an expert in that, but we won again. But this time it was 5-4. It was 6-3 the first time. And neither our side nor the ACLU is eager to go back. There's been no more Supreme Court cases about what that is. But I go nuts about the sort of politics of it, because nobody's talking about putting them out of school. You know, it's just a matter of identifying what the behavior is. And to me, the drug test is a way of making the no-use issue real. It's a way of taking it seriously. So if I were going to say what's wrong with student drug testing, what's wrong with it is it's expensive. It's difficult. I think you can make a case, is it really the best way to use your money? That case I can understand. But the idea that it's a violation of civil liberties, I have a very hard time with that, thinking that that's it. But I tell you, the ACLU has made that their #1 priority, is go after drug testing. And they're going after the PHPs too. It hasn't happened for the case yet, but I can see it building around this issue about impinging on people's rights, privacy. Other things, I have another tape. One of the things I told you about my experience in Massachusetts when Mike Dukakis, we got more time. And I think, okay, I've got a whole other tape right up here. No slides, but an entirely different movie. And it has to do with prevention. So when you run out of questions and lets you stop, I'm going to play that tape. So you had a question, comment?
Yeah, what about, now there's some states that don't have PHPs.
Oh, yeah.
Such as California and stuff. What are you seeing about any difference in recovery rates or in the
Oh, I don't know.
healthcare professionals or anything different?
I don't know, but I think they're going to have one again in California. My understanding is they're going to do that. But we'll see how it goes. The PHP people, the people who run the PHPs, are really running scared about the controversies, and they think by going around and talking about them puts them in the crosshairs. It's a problem. It's a problem.
The other thing about the healthcare professionals, that, like you said, many of them will have 30, 90 days of treatment, longer than the typical client that
Yeah.
comes in. And so how much does that play a role versus, you know, the monitoring afterwards?
So I have a friend whose name I'm not going to use, who told me that he discussed this issue with the folks at Hazelton, who made a comment that it really just has to do with the fact that they got really good treatment. So he asked the folks here to look at how their doctors and lawyers do after they leave compared to other people when they're not in the PhD. And the answer was, you don't get the same results. It doesn't have to do with social class or intelligence or income.
But length of treatment.
Length of treatment is not important either. I mean, comparatively, whether it's 30 or 90 days. The question is what happens afterwards. That's my message. That's my message. It's what happens after they leave the treatment. I don't care if it's 5 years. It's the same issue with MAT. Think about this. Vincent Dole, when he started methadone, he saw an analogy between methadone and heroin addiction and insulin and diabetes. So you're going to stay on the insulin all your life. Now, there are a few that come off, but basically that's right. That's what he thought, but it doesn't happen. They don't stay. Do you know how long the average patient stays in buprenorphine or naltrexone? The answer is 3 to 6 months. 3 to 6 months? And what happens when they leave? They all relapse. What kind of treatment is that? And methadone, the average is 6 to 9 months. I don't care if they're in methadone for 5 years, 10 years. What happens when they leave? Because they're going to leave. And so what I want people to think about is, okay, so what next? Where does that go? What does that, the AA line, you know, how's that working out for you? Let's see how it works out. When my friends in MAT, they go berserk when I say the average stay is 3 to 6 months in buprenorphine and naltrexone. The average stay in methadone is 6 to 9 months. They don't want to think about that. I say just do a survival of a cohort. Go 3 years ago, take 100 consecutive admissions, and look how long they lasted. It's not hard to do that. You don't need a research grant. You can see quickly, because they all know what happens when they leave. The average dose of methadone when people left the program I was studying was 50 milligrams. You don't walk away from 50 milligrams and not use drugs, some opiates. That doesn't happen. And the relatively small percentage of people who come back, what does that mean? Most of them don't come back. Why is that? Again, I really think that we need to have all the treatment be looked at in the same way. And it's a humbling assessment for all of us, because this disease is really tough. It really is. And it's not going to be fixed by improving treatment. Yes.
Doctor, how would you recommend the family exert influence on the addict or alcoholic while they maintain their own sanity?
You're right. That's right. Well, I like the idea of having consequences. And, you know, I think that the bottom line, I was one time giving a talk in Long Island, and it was kind of a long way from the airport to where I was talking. And I had this cab driver. What am I doing? I'm going to give this talk. We're talking about drugs. Well, he had some experience with drugs. He'd like to talk to me about it in this long drive. And he was a heroin addict. I said, well, you know, obviously you're doing pretty well now. What happened? He said, my family gave up on me. And after the long time of supporting me, my mother said I wasn't welcome back in the house until I was completely clean, and had been that way for some time. And he said, I didn't think she really meant it. And it was a rainy day, and it was cold, and I was sick. I felt terrible, and it was a Sunday, and I knew they were having Sunday dinner at 3, so I came there and knocked on the door. My mother came to the door and looked at me and said, are you clean? He He said, no, but I'm gonna get clean. And she said, goodbye, and closed the door. And that's when it changed. Now, how can you do that? You know, like, especially with, you can't do it with kids, where it's very difficult. And what happens is there's a kind of blackmail, and the kids will do this. Okay, I'll drop out of school. Okay, I'll kill myself. And that absolutely stops the discussion. At that point, it's over. They can't face that because they might do it, and they could. When I say,
Might also kill themselves using though.
well, that's right. But I agree- I say that.
Tough spot, tough spot.
But can the parent stand doing that? And that's it. But the other thing that's more important to me is, can the family draw the conclusion that they can't use any alcohol or any other drug, and that they're going to test for it? And I think most families can't do that. They really don't see that they need to do that. And of course, the addicts don't think they need to do that. And that's a line that for all of us is so obvious, but it's not out there in the world. And I think it's very hard to have families have that kind of a bright line and enforce it. And my thought is, we all need to be about educating. You were talking about educating people.
Yes, exactly.
Of just explaining it. We've been doing this for a long time. And it doesn't come from a study. It comes from our experience. And this is what we have seen. And what I say to people is, when I say governors or anybody, I say, find people in your community who are in recovery. Heroin addicts, anything, alcohol. Find people who are doing good and ask them how they do it. Let them be your pathfinder, not the experts. The experts will give you a lot of double talk. Just talk to the people in your community. And one of the places that I'm very interested in, well, I won't say that story, that's kind of personal. Go ahead. Yes.
Well, to that point, since you have done so much research, why isn't there more research, sort of backward research from recovery looking backwards, as opposed to applying an intervention and tracking people, which is fraught with so many.
The typical trial is 8 to 12 weeks. A long trial is 6 months.
Right.
And when you look at the 6 month trial, you'll find most of the people have left the treatment by 6 months. And what they do, I mean, it's amazing to me. There's no standard that says what we're after is no use. That idea is not in the literature. It's how much HIV was there, how much opiate use was there. And they really believe, and this is the harm reduction model, okay, yes, Bob, they are continuing to use, but they're using a lot less now than they did before they started to take methadone. So what we're doing is a good thing. I guess so. But where does it go? Now what happens? That's my way of thinking about it. And I think it's up to us to articulate that, that vision from our experience. To me, what's amazing about the PHPs is how alien it is from the expertise in the field. It's something that is hard for people to even think about. That being a standard that you would have. Like I said, the leader in our field who said, Bob, I understand that for doctors, but there's an awful lot of patients we have who just can't do that. You're giving up on it. Go to a meeting down in the inner city communities or in a rural area. You'll see the same thing there. Go where there are people who are doing it. One of the leaders in the field, very influential person, is a family member, and she has a son who is in recovery. He went to a Hazelton kind of program, and he's fine. And so I was telling her, I want her to get her organization to get going in this area, because the other people that she's got don't go that way. And I said, think about what's happening to your son. He's going to meetings all the time. said, you need to tell these other people about what's happening to your boy. That's what they have to do. They have to understand that. And it's really tough because the experts that she turns to don't do that.
Just add, I'm gonna re-ask that question. So why not more research? If you find 1,000 people who are in recovery and figure out how they got there, as opposed to finding 1,000 people who are sick and trying to track how they get there.
Right on.
Well, do any of you know Bill White? Does that mean anything?
Yes.
Well, he's a saint.
Yes.
Exactly. Well, he's the guy recovery, and it's very interesting that he doesn't talk the way I do about AA and NA. Have you noticed that? He doesn't. He talks about community support. He's much more nuanced, is the term, about all of that. And but I think he's right. But you've got this recovery movement. The biggest thing that's happened in the field since I've been is the recovery movement. But in the recovery movement, there's a lot of confusion about what recovery is. Because I think the numbers are something like this. Something like 22 million people identify themselves, that they do a survey that this projects into 22 million as being in recovery. And that's what they talk about, all this recovery. But the total in NA and AA in the country is, I don't know, 3 million? Well, how do you get from 3 to 22? Well, you get there because there's a lot of squirrelishness about what that means to be in recovery. I don't know, but I think that would be part of the issue. What does it mean? You know, SAMHSA has a recovery standard. It has nothing to do with abstinence. You know, you're getting better. That's recovery. Well, I go berserk over that. To me, they're hijacking the word. But I don't know. But to me, what I say at ASAM, you know, it's an uphill battle in American Society of Addiction Medicine about this, because most of the doctors are into MAT, and so Marv Seppala and I are kind of, and Bill White are a little spooky over there in terms of I know what these people are thinking about that. But to me, what's striking is how many people are in ASAM are themselves in recovery, and get them to speak about it. And they speak with one voice. Yeah.
I think it's a good question, it's a good comment you made, sir. I think you do hear the things that are working for people, but you hear them in the meetings.
Right.
And that's why they need to go there. And I think that's one of the correlations between regular meeting attendance and long-term sobriety.
Well, you know, to me about the regular meetings, and many of you are in recovery yourselves, I'm sure. I assume, isn't that right? Maybe I'm wrong about that. I assume you are, many of you. But the question about all of that is to think about, well, you know, why do people keep going to meetings? And I think that one reason is because the risk of relapse is forever. You know, Philip Seymour Hoffman is sort of a stunning example of that risk. You know, not just 5 years, it was 20 years as far as I know. So that goes on all the time. But the other thing is, I am not in recovery. I go to meetings, but I have never been to a meeting that I didn't learn something that was useful to me. And I think that one of the main reasons to go to meetings is sort of to get yourself living a better life. So it isn't just a matter, it isn't better. The first principle is not using, but it's more than that. And again, that's not, you know, medicine doesn't think like that. It's a narrower definition. You don't say that about diabetes. You know, that you're going to keep going to meetings to live a better life as a diabetic. I don't think. The other thing let me mention, one other thing that I think is very interesting is about brain science. what makes a drug is the super stimulation of brain reward.
Brain what?
So, brain reward. So what's happening is that the normal pleasures that stimulate brain reward and sort of eating and sex are sort of the standards, but it's all kinds of things that produce happiness and feeling good and want to do more of that. Stamp collecting, I mean, it's all kinds of things. But the drugs are 100 or 1,000 times more powerful. That's just the biology. And people talk in rooms, and you all, I'm sure, say this, you know, every addict and alcoholic has got relatives who are, and it's a genetic thing and all this stuff. Well, you know what? All the animals get addicted. Not just the happy ones, the sad ones, all of them. I think we really underestimate the power of the drugs to take over people's thinking. I think it's a very big deal about it, and it's very strong. And so what's happened is that the mammalian brain has evolved with this brain reward, and there's no animal model for addiction in the wild, only laboratories. People have to give the rats or the monkeys the drug because they can't get the drugs. They don't have drug dealers in their jungle or wherever it is. So there's been no, and human beings didn't until very recently. So there's no selection pressure to protect from this super stimulation. And what's happened in the modern world is really interesting. Now we have thousands of chemicals. Thousands of chemicals. This new psychoactive substances, the designer drugs, are endless. Endless. Fentanyl is replacing heroin. Why is that? Because the drug dealers, it's much smarter for them to have a lab where they can control everything. They don't have to have poppy fields. They don't have to have big tons of this and that and opium. It's just a little lab. They can make this anywhere, move the lab around. Send it from China. We don't have any trouble getting it through the country. You send it in the mail. I mean, it's amazing to think about this. So what we've got is a tremendous biology of reinforcement, reward, and a globalized, highly sophisticated, highly integrated supply system, innovative, to meet that demand. That's where we are in what's going on. And one of the things, here's another thing that I share with you, is that there's something screwy about thinking that the reason we have a heroin problem is because of the prescription drug problem. Now, the prescription drug problem with opiates is a real problem. I'm not questioning that. But I'm questioning whether that's the engine for the heroin problem. And that is this, that virtually all of the people, you know, if you take, here's the sample, this is from SAMHSA data. Of the people who have used prescription opiates non-medically, so this is not people who've got a prescription, but they've used it non-medically, prescription opiates. Of that group, only 3.6% have ever used heroin. That's a pretty small number. And if you think about it, how many medical patients, if they have a trouble with their drug, are going to turn to a drug dealer? Really? The people who do that are the people who've had a lot of experience buying drugs from drug dealers. They're almost all people who have been using drugs from adolescence. The real engine for the heroin problem is matured or maturing older polydrug users from adolescence. That's a big deal. That's why they use so many other drugs in that picture. So I think there's a lot of reason to cut back on opiate prescription, and the biggest one is not the diversion of it. It's a question of whether it's actually useful in pain treatment. And I think that's a very serious question about that. But it is important, but the heroin issue, the idea that somehow the reason we have heroin is because we cut back on the prescription opiates, no, I don't think so. I think the heroin distribution has become very much more sophisticated, and it's going to be around for a long time. And as I say, this movement to fentanyl, I think it's going to change the whole game. And there's 100 other drugs like fentanyl. Nothing special about fentanyl. You've got endless alternatives to fentanyl that purely from the lab. So I guess I could say to all of you, you don't have to worry about going out of business. There'll be plenty to go. Yep.
So I'm definitely on board with what you're selling, and I try and educate my patients and their families that 1 year is typically understood to be early recovery,
Yeah.
and that 5 years typically understood to be 5 years. But that's I'm just one person.
Right.
You're saying a game changer is going to be better educating the families and the systems and getting every board. But I think before that, the segue to bringing that about is addiction is notoriously difficult to educate. And even professionals that I meet, bless their hearts, don't do a good enough job about it. It's a complicated brain disease, and everybody that's going through here is going to watch Pleasure Unwoven. It's boring, it's slow, and it doesn't do a good enough job. So what do we have to do, to educate and explain this to folks better? They're dying to know. I'm treating a bunch of heroin addicts that are amateur pharmacists, like they're dying for that specific knowledge. And I do that lecture personally. I think I do an all right job. But I think if we could start there, if the families and the patients truly don't understand the forces at play, they're not going to buy into this 5-year in monitoring. I can see that.
Right.
We can understand that. But how can we better educate that? Because if we don't get it at the beginning, this compromising force, how are we going to bring it about in the long run?
So here's what I say to patients, I've been working on this for 48 years. You've been working on it for 6 months, a year, 5 years, whatever it is. And I say, okay, you have a different vision than I do. I get that. You may be right, I may be right. Let's see. Because if I'm right, you're going to have lots more opportunities to think about this. And what I want you to walk out of this office, remember what I said. You don't even have to come back here. But remember, I want you to think about it. And use that when you get whatever happens. And if your family member does great and never has any more problems, well, I'm very happy for you. But that hasn't been my experience. It doesn't happen very often like that. And good luck to you. But here's where I am with it. The subtitle of my book, The Selfish Brain, is Learning from Addiction. And my line is, addiction is a great teacher. Pitiless, cruel, but powerful. And it's up to you to learn. And you figure it out. Watch what happens. But what I object to is the treatment field sort of pandering to the idea that they're going to fix people. And that's not good. That's not good. My top line is what I said, treatment never fixed anybody. Yeah.
Kind of building on what Joe said, I think we as professionals can do a really great job educating patients when they're leaving about what to expect. But then we're up against a traditional healthcare system where the providers are not educated, they don't have training in addiction. And, I appreciate the idea of having long-term accountability in the healthcare system. It seems like a real challenge with the lack of education in that system. And also there's a shortage of primary care physicians.
Well, but think about this, my friends in the field who are promoting buprenorphine want to get the primary care physicians to treat opiate addicts. Okay, I say, well, with all due respect, what does the primary care physician have to offer?
Right.
It's not obvious to me that giving them a prescription for 30 days of buprenorphine is a treatment for addiction.
Right.
I don't get it.
Right.
I don't get it. You know, I don't have a waiver for buprenorphine because I'm not a drug treatment program. I don't want to write a prescription for anything for 30 days and have them come back and talk to me. I don't get it. That's where this country is about the heroin. That seems to me, you know, we saw what doctors did with, are doing with pain medicines, where the medical people overpromise, they prescribe drug that is highly abused, diverted, it becomes part of the problem, okay? We're doing the same thing with buprenorphine. We've oversold it, it's being diverted, it's not really changing people's lives. I don't know, but that's where we are. And that's where all the money's going. And people love it because it gets the primary care doctors involved. I don't know, I don't understand that way of thinking.
It's back to me.
Yeah, but it's dominant.
Yes, I know.
We're the oddballs, not them, in the back.
Yeah, kind of building off of your comments in terms of the treatment centers and facilities selling, you know, the cure and recognizing that it's not going to be a quick cure. I'm wondering whether there's benefit in looking at addiction more similar to, and you kind of talk about with the 5-year standard that comes out of, we've got that in terms of cancer treatments, they look at 5-year survivals and different treatments and how, one of the things that cancer can I think teach us is how to better stage the illness and define what it is. So it used to be that cancer was consumption, that just the people were wasting away and they had no idea what they were doing. And quite honestly, oftentimes family members cared for cancer patients similar to how we still do addiction, where you don't talk about it, you don't share the stories, and it might be contagious, and you know what. Then we started to better define the science, as Joe was mentioning, different cancers, different etiologies for the different cancers, and different stages. One of the things that I get frustrated with is that as clinicians, we often know that people have different prognoses. And we will talk about it in our team meetings. This person's prognosis is quite good. This person's prognosis is horrific. But that's about the level of our sophistication. And there's, I think, real value in trying to apply what we have done with cancer, where there's stage 1, there's stage 2, there's stage 3, there's stage 4. That helps the patient understand what they're getting themselves into, but also, having lived through family members with cancer, it helps the families. You sit down with the treatment team and they say, this is stage 4. That means something altogether different than stage 1. And society even understands that. But we don't do that in addiction. It's either you're cured and it's a success, or you've relapsed and it's a failure. Too black and white.
Well, let me comment about some of that, what you're saying. You know, the patients that I most have most pessimism about are what you're calling stage 1. The ones I'm happiest with are stage 4. Because they've got reason to listen. The stage 1 people are think I'm the problem.
Right.
So that's one thing. The other thing is the cancer treatment, by the way, does just what the buprenorphine does, and that is the way you you show evidence of success. is the person lives 2 months longer with the drug than they do without the drug. I swear to God, that's what it is. And the quality of life in that 2 months is often pretty grim, but that's evidence. Now, I don't think we're like these because there are no hopeless addicts. Everybody can get well. Everybody. And that's not true for cancer. That's not true for cancer. And to me, that's we're advantaged in that regard. But we are swimming against the tide. And what we're telling people they don't want to hear. And, you know, if you think about it, somebody like me, and maybe you, could easily be thought of as nuts. Because, you know, what is that line where guys walking around with a hammer, everything looks like a nail? And so we're into addiction. If they're using drugs or alcohol, we think it's a problem. And the world out there will say, you know, yeah, I got drunk, and everybody gets drunk from time to time. That's not very significant. I mean, that's the way they think. They socialize with other people who are doing what they're doing, and they see that, you know, I'm a Puritan. You know, you're the problem in this. And I think it's very hard to think about. Well, not everybody who uses heroin is going to have a life with heroin. Not everybody who has a problem with alcohol is an alcoholic. It isn't. There aren't any bright lines. I don't know how you say this one is serious and that one isn't. I don't know about that. It's not a simple thing. I think to think about that. You know. Well, anyway, that's where I am. I think, you know, I feel sorry for the cancer doctors. I think I got a better deal. I think I'm offered something better. More likely to succeed. Yeah.
Well, first of all, I want to thank you for being here because we actually used some of your research to develop the programs that we use to do ongoing monitoring and support, like the Physicians Health programs. We also hand out your article to everyone who joins our program. So
wow, I didn't know that.
Didn't know, yeah. So
I had to come here to hear
also quote
that.
you when I go to talk about recovery management at conferences, which I just finished a PowerPoint yesterday, and you're right in there. So I just want to thank you. It's really fantastic for us to have you here. Pretty much everyone in this row right here, you're kind of preaching to the choir because these are the programs that we all work in. So just kind of, you know, here's your fan section right there. We're like, yeah, you said it. That's right. Really good day-to-day, guys. So, but what I do want to say is we have these programs and we sometimes have a hard time recruiting people to it. They don't want to sign the contract like the way you say it. Some of it's money, like I mentioned before, but some of it is, I don't know what you know, some of the other reasons are. Everyone has a reason because it always doesn't feel like I really need that. I know I'm you know, I have a problem, but I don't need that.
Right.
You know, and so sometimes they kind of negotiate their way down to just doing the drug testing, and we offer that. It's better than nothing kind of thing. If it's positive a couple times, they'll do the whole deal, right?
Oh no, that's right.
You know, the research doesn't show peeing in a cup makes the outcome. It's all the things that go around it.
Well, but peeing in the cup makes it visible.
Right.
And that is very valuable.
So we still do that, but you know, we need ways that we can help our patients and some of our counselors who don't necessarily think, you know, maybe help drive in that direction. What we found is that the counselor and the family and the coach that are going to work with them all sit down together, the odds of them actually signing the contract go up substantially, but we see that's a very rare occasion.
Right.
I don't know how often that happens, maybe once a month across all of our sites if we're lucky. So we're working to help our clinicians kind of understand how important this side of the equation is. We know treatment is critical, but it's not enough. And I know.
Well, treatment is wonderful, but it doesn't last.
It's not enough. So we're trying to work with our clinicians to help shift some of that thinking, but we also know they're fighting against the patients who don't want to do it, and the family who doesn't want to do it, and the money that's not there. So just, you know, having you here and talking like this, I think really helps helps us with what we're trying to do, because I think everyone understands that it's a great idea, but getting them to sign on the line and putting it into play is tough for all of us.
Well, you know, one of the things that I wanted to do with coming here, and this is a wonderful experience for me also, is to get your thoughts about this. And I talked about the mismatch between treatment is short and the disease is long. Okay, but there's another mismatch, and that's what you're talking about. And that is the mismatch in the way we think about it and the way our customers, our clients, our patients think. And so what we're talking about, and that's why I was saying, we end up trying to seduce people. You know, well, just do it for 3 months and see how you do.
We started out going 6 months is a short
Yeah,
term,
right.
3 months.
But I think that's where we are. I want to hear what you say, but that's how I think about it. And I really think that what we're talking about is the whole society. It isn't just that patient. It isn't just that one person. There's a sort of collective view about all this that is very different from the way we see it. And, you know, how about, in the course of my lifetime and your lifetime, think about what's happened to us in terms of our thinking about cigarette smoking. It's pretty striking. It's pretty striking. We still got a whole lot of people smoking cigarettes, including young people. But there's nobody who thinks it's okay from a health point of view. Nobody makes that case. That's really a big deal. Now, when you take alcohol, see, I say, okay, we've got 2 legal drugs. We got alcohol and tobacco. Now with tobacco,
And pot now.
I'm going to get to pot. I'm going to get to pot. We got these 2, okay. Now, tobacco, everybody knows it's bad for your health. It's socially unacceptable. You don't mind saying to somebody, put out a cigarette, you can't smoke here. You got all this stuff is there. That's right, okay. I'm talking about alcohol. We don't have that attitude. We have the attitude that drinking alcohol is normal. Drinking alcohol is healthy. Drinking alcohol is good for you. Good for your heart. All kinds of things over here. And so the war in drug policy is, are the other drugs, starting with marijuana, is it more like tobacco or is it more like alcohol? And what's very interesting to me is that the legalization folks, who you can imagine I spent my life fighting with those people, want to say it's like alcohol, only better. It's less problematic than alcohol, but it's normal to smoke marijuana. And it's healthy, and they sell it as medicine, which is really fascinating to think about that in where it's going. But I don't know whether you're aware, but this whole issue about the medicine being the door into drugs, which is what's happening with marijuana. Do you know that's happening with other drugs too? LSD, psilocybin, all the hallucinogens are coming down exactly that same path. They don't produce overdose death, just like marijuana. They treat with PTSD. Remember, Sigmund Freud proposed treating morphine addiction with cocaine. Yeah, I mean, this is not new, but it's amazing to watch what's happening to this. And where do I come out on all this? What, you know, now after all these 48 years, what I think about is, I think recreational pharmacology is a problem for health. Put it all together. It isn't this drug or that drug. It's using drugs for fun. That's the problem. And it isn't this one's good and that one's bad. No, they're all bad. And I have 2 daughters. My younger daughter, a teenager, said to me she didn't want to smoke cigarettes. I said, well, that's good. Why don't you want to smoke cigarettes? She said, because I don't like them. That's right. I love this word. Kids are experimenting with drugs. Oh, what a wonderful idea. great idea.
My God,
What?
you knocked your mic out.
What a great idea to experiment with drugs, because they're gonna like them. I know how that experiment goes, because of the brain effects of it. And what do you think about that as a society? Where are we with that? And again, this is a real heavy lift. We're talking about changing thoughts about all kinds of things. As I say, alcohol is a big deal, just as a personal aside about alcohol. I was a fairly heavy drinker, including in high school, and it didn't do me any good. I was not a very good high school student. And my drinking was a problem. Not a huge problem, but enough of a problem. And my drinking went down after that. But it was still, not always terrific. But came a time in 1978 when my life, I had a crisis. And I had had this meteoric rise in my career. And all of a sudden, I was fired. I was the head of the National Institute on Drug Abuse. Jimmy Carter came in, his head of HEW at that time, Joe Califano, wanted new people in all these areas. First, he fired the head of mental health, then he fired the head of alcohol, and then he fired the head of drugs. That was me. He didn't care what my political party was. He didn't care what kind of job I was doing. He wanted his people in those jobs. So I was out on the street. And I did a lot of thinking about who I am, what I'm doing. At the same time, I had two kids who were early teenagers. And I did something and I said, I can make some changes in me. And one of the changes was I started running. I'd been athletic as a kid, but nothing else. And so I became a runner. For the next 25 years, I pretty much ran every day. Loved it until my knees gave out. But the other change thing I did was to stop drinking. So I had three things that were on my mind. One was I was working with a lot of people who had alcohol problems. And I didn't like saying that I was drinking and they weren't. So I thought it was easier for me to say, I'm not drinking either. And the other thing was my kids. I wanted the kids to grow up seeing some adult who didn't drink. My wife drinks. They saw if someone did. She's never had a problem. I didn't want her to stop, but I wanted to stop. And so when I talked to kids and they asked me, well, you drink, I say, no, I don't. So my sobriety date by that definition was August 15th, 1978. A long time ago. But by that time, my drinking was hardly any drinking. So it wasn't a big thing. I didn't go to meetings. And, you'd have to put a gun in my head to get me to drink. Now, to say that I don't have a craving for alcohol would be way wrong to think about that. But anyhow, I do think that there's a lot of thinking about these things for all of us. And the other thing is, I say to you that I'm obviously sort of toward the end of my game, let's say. And everything I'm working on is, you're thinking decades. The younger ones of you are going to see all these things change and evolve over the next 40 years. And it ain't going to be solved. And so you get to feel, well, you put your shoulder to the wheel, you do what you can do, and enjoy doing it. But it is a heavy lift. And it's also very clear that a lot of very smart people disagree with everything that I say. There isn't anything I say that there aren't people smarter than me who disagree with. Nothing. Yeah.
They might be smarter than you, but I doubt they're more honest than you are. I wasn't looking forward to coming to this meeting. I thought, oh Christ, here we go again, death by PowerPoint. more statistics, more p-values, more ends, give me a friggin' break. I think we're required to come to this. You're a good storyteller. You're an excellent storyteller. You blow some life into this stuff. You're genuine. I sometimes think of a story as it's data with a soul. And I appreciate you. And I just want you to know that.
Thank you, thank you. Well, I want you to know that I'm pretty serious in saying how much I respect what you're doing here. And what a special place this is for our field all over the world. I had the privilege of writing with Dan Anderson, the story of Hazleton, and publishing it many years ago when he got an award from ASIC. But and I think what you're doing now is just as innovative as ever before, maybe more. The whole thing you're talking about extending the reach, finding ways to do that, relating to people about it is a huge deal. The bringing medication into a drug-free program is a huge deal. That's leadership. I'm here with two missions. I'm here till Friday, so I got more. You're getting me started. I want two things from Hazleton. Number one, I want you to pioneer in this 5-year recovery stage. I want you to think about how you're going to assess what the odds are of people going through your treatment, being in recovery 5 years later, and what you can learn from that. Who is and who isn't, what do they say about it, what do they say about what they got here, but really that's what you want to do, and let people know, everybody who comes in, this is what we're trying to achieve. So that's number one. Number two, I am persuaded that the future of what we're doing hinges on the family. The family. I really think that is where the game is. And the question is, how do we educate, support, mobilize the family? The family has the pain. The family sees the devastation. The family sees the relapse. But nobody's paying attention to it. And nobody's helping.
And I think sometimes it can be hard to have conversations with family members, especially like you're talking about, telling them to pull their kid from college and things that are difficult to do. And sometimes I think that's why they get more neglected too, because they're just easier to kick down the road. We're focused on the patient, but the family, but we need to be courageous and speak to them a lot about the realities of what could happen to their loved one if they don't help in the process, if they're not there to help set boundaries, if it takes courage on their part, and whether or not they like it, they are involved in this illness.
Right.
And and helping them to learn how they can get support to deal with that alone too, how it's impacting themselves and what they can do. And I think just remembering that importance of not being afraid to talk to them about things that might be difficult or uncomfortable, because sometimes they get really angry with us.
Oh, absolutely.
But we try our very best to keep them, they'll call back later and say, okay, sorry, I'm ready to talk now, or sorry about the way I talked to you yesterday, I was just really upset about X, Y, or Z, but, building that therapeutic relationship with those people, it's really equivalent, because it's such a parallel journey,
But let me ask you now, you all are more engaged than I am, many of you anyhow, in the 12 steps. And there is a program, a 12-step program for families, and that's Al-Anon.
Right.
Where is Al-Anon in all this?
Well, I think obviously that's philosophically on 12-step recovery, and I do talk a lot about Al-Anon, but I think you make a very excellent point about a parent asking them to detach from their child with love is really challenging, because it goes against all their instincts as a parent.
Or their responsibility.
Or their responsibility as a parent. But I talked to them about a variety of things. I talked to them about Al-Anon. There's things like Family Anonymous, NAMI meetings, just different ways to get support all around. And I don't know if you're familiar with it, but all of us have been trained in the CRAFT model.
Yeah,
And using that model with parents is actually really effective because you're allowing them to have interactions with their loved one who's still using chemicals, but you're still having parameters and boundaries around it, letting them know that their use is not okay.
so wait, tell me what that means about using the CRAFT model by setting limits. What would,
So, for example, if you're not ready to do the whole detach with love, I'm gonna cut you off, and your son's using, you can say, you know, Bob, I want you to come over for dinner on Saturday night. My condition of you coming over for dinner is that you need to be not drinking when you come over. If Bob comes over and he's not drinking and you have a nice dinner, you say, hey Bob, it was really great that you came over and we had dinner, and thank you for being sober.
Yeah.
If they come over and they're drinking, you say, well, you know what, here's the deal. I asked you to not drink, we're not gonna have dinner tonight, I'm sorry, you're gonna have to go home.
Yeah.
You know, and it challenged my thinking, my
Uh-huh.
traditional Al-Anon 12-step thinking when I heard it. But for,
It's less black and white.
it's less black and white.
well, but wait a minute, I don't know about that, because what Al-Anon says is all you can do is control your behavior.
Right.
You can't control their behavior.
Right.
So I can't control whether you're drinking or not.
Right.
But I can control whether you come into this house when you're drinking.
That's right.
I don't think they're diametrically opposed.
No, but I think that's a limited role. Think how different that is from the PHPs. You know, the sky falls if you use once.
Right.
That's a very different kind of message.
Right.
To think about it. And I think all of us would say a person who's got a drug problem, whether it's a kid or an adult, if they're drinking, I don't need anything else. I don't need to know whether they're using cocaine or anything else. Family story. I went to a family reunion. This is a number of years ago. Had a cousin who had a big drug problem, and he knew that. Everybody in the family knew that. We got to the reunion, and he wanted to sit next to me. That's fine. He's drinking a beer. He looked at me and he said, I see you're looking at that beer. I said, yeah, Donnie, I'm seeing the beer. He says, I suppose you know what that means. I said, I have a pretty good idea what that means. Yep, I do. 3 months later, Donnie was dead. He drove his car into a concrete abutment at 3 a.m. But that's the kind of thing about you know, the way it looks to us or me is pretty black and white. And yeah, you can play the string out, and you know that's what harm reduction is about. You sort of work it out. You're not driving and drinking. You're just getting drunk and taking a cab home. I guess that's better. I don't know. It doesn't feel much better to me. But again, it's the way things are going. I really think that not only do families learn, but whole cultures learn about drugs. And so I think we're on a mission. And there's going to be a lot of new stuff coming out. I think one of the things you're going to see this buprenorphine thing blow up. I think it's not going to end well, just like the prescription opiates is not ending well. But I don't know, maybe not. It looks to me like it's going to be a pretty big disappointment down the road. But we'll see. Yeah.
Since you raised that again, back to the Suboxone issue and stuff. And one of the things that we saw before we ever started using medications was the high atypical discharge rate of our patients with opiate dependence.
Oh, yes.
When they were in treatment, they didn't stay.
That's why you did Core 12.
That's part of why we started Core 12. And we do know that if, with Core 12, they are staying, we have reduced the atypical discharge rate. They are staying in treatment longer. They are more likely to transition down to aftercare afterwards. So, you know, what we may be doing is buying some time.
Now, wait a minute, I wanted to clarify. When I was talking about buprenorphine, is not what you're doing,
Uh-huh.
because
Yeah.
you're doing it in the context of a drug-free program. I'm talking about what's happening with the private doctors
Yeah.
who are writing the prescription. I don't have a problem. I'm in favor of your using buprenorphine and naltrexone. I think that's
So
wonderful,
do you
but
think
that's
in that-
that's a recovery-oriented use of medication.
Right. You think that in that, I mean, because I don't want everyone to be left with the impression that.
The buprenorphine
it's
is the
not
problem.
a good idea.
No, exactly the opposite.
So,
I feel the same way about methadone.
uh-huh.
That I think putting methadone, you could do that in a drug-free program too, with the 12-step program. I have a colleague who's a leader in our field who says, you know, Bob, you're very interested in AA, and I want you in NA. I want you to write a paper and say how many heroin addicts are harmed by AA and NA because the programs won't accept their use of methadone. Okay? You are forcing them off methadone to their death because of your AA and NA attitude. That's his opinion. So that's why I did the study of the methadone program. And amazingly, as I say, 2/3 of them were going to meetings. And I asked them, you're going to meetings, hurt the methadone program or helped you? What do you think? Something like 5% had a negative experience. Everybody else, or not everybody, almost everybody else, thought it was helping them. So my guy was wrong about that, at least as a whole thing. But how many people in methadone have any idea that the people are going to meetings? I don't think they even know that they're going to meetings. You ask them, how do you handle that? Well, a lot of them don't tell anybody but their sponsor that they're taking methadone. But here's another example. So this person who heads the methadone program, and I love this methadone program, he's a wonderful guy, a colleague. He says to me, I can't get my methadone patients into the Oxford houses because they won't take anybody in that's on methadone. Well, it turns out that the guy who created Oxford House is a very close friend of mine, and he lives just down the block from me. So I said, let's work on this together. So we got him together. You know, I don't know whether you know this about the Oxford House, but every one is run by its own self. They don't come from Silver Spring. They don't control who's in there. They vote on who's there. So he couldn't control it, but he could work with some people in the area to give this a try. And they did. And you know what happened? All of them failed because they were selling methadone in the Oxford House. They were using drugs. It wasn't because they were taking methadone. It was because they were selling drugs. So you got to be careful about these stereotypes. You know what's going on. That was to me educational. This guy didn't know they were doing that. Okay, I think we're probably ready to stop. Anybody else will want to? Yeah.
What was your third goal? You said you had 3 goals for being here?
3 goals.
You gave- your
I
first
don't
one
think I
was
only have
five-year
2. I
recovery.
think I only have 2. Did I have 3? I have 3 missing elements, but I have 2 goals. Okay, so one goal is the 5-year recovery standard, to actually assess what happens to your people. And by the way, I think the issue about how long people stay and whether they're inpatient or outpatient, all of that to me are researchable questions. I think there's a lot, the longer the better, I get that. But you've got a trade-off in terms of cost that needs to be considered in that too. But anyway, that's number 1. And number 2 is even more important to me if that's possible, and that's the family. How do we change this dynamic so the family is not the problem or irrelevant, both of which are real big problems to me, irrelevant and a problem. I want to make the family the leverage point to get sustained recovery. I want to get them educated and supported, so they feel they've got a place to come. But I want you to read not my article, the Washington Post article, How's Amanda? Okay? And think about living. And think, what would I do to help Libby? Because the family, I think, is the key. And the other thing I'll tell you is, I was talking to people who are very much more involved with the politics of the heroin epidemic than I am. And I don't know whether you know this, but the country is going through a big deal about the heroin epidemic. And so it's on newspapers, it's the politicians, and this guy was saying he meets with governors and congressmen, and everyone has got a story about a nephew, a child, a neighbor who's died of a heroin overdose. That's got their attention. That is a very big deal, what's happening. That's going to create lots of opportunities to educate people. And it's very different. When I started in 1968 with the heroin addiction in Washington, the typical heroin was a black inner city criminal. That demography couldn't be more different. It's rural, it's small town, it's women almost as much as men. It's an entirely different, and that changes the politics of it in a way that's favorable to what's happening right now. And I think, getting that going. So to me, that question is, the families have the access, they've got the passion to devote their lives to the cause. The ones whose kids are dead are ready to put the family fortune on the line. They understand how serious it is. They're going to drive the politics. Yeah.
I've got just a couple of statements, maybe. Family, I totally agree with you. All behavior, in my opinion, is learned. And so in the education that I do with family, it's about the family member learning what they learned growing up, because chances are they have that in their family and maybe didn't know that. And so as they learn these behaviors and these traits of how they navigate their loved one in that relationship, when that person is addicted, that could either help or hinder.
Either way, they can learn from it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The other statement is about 12-step philosophy, and the concept of anonymity, I think, has been twisted in a way that people are afraid to speak outside of the meetings about recovery. And that's what needs to happen on a societal, global level, is for those that are in recovery to speak about it and to speak boldly about what that means to live in recovery.
Yes, I completely agree with that. I want to pick up on that issue, because I don't think there's any problem with speaking up and saying you're in a program of recovery that includes no use of alcohol or other drugs and community meetings. That's not saying I'm in AA or NA. But what drives me nuts is people like my friend Bill White, who use a very broad definition of recovery and community support that doesn't even include that, that it's no use. I want to say that it means no use of alcohol or other drugs. That's what recovery means. You don't have to say I go to AA, but you need to say that, I think.
It's like he's saying a bunch of things and then not saying anything.
Well, I think at least it comes across that way. It doesn't
That's
come
my
across,
thing.
have any bite to it.
Right.
In what it is. And the other thing is, like when I talk about my stopping drinking, now I'm not in recovery, so it doesn't apply. But when I talk to alcoholics and I say, okay, this is a family disease, your kids are at risk, and your grandkids are at risk, I say, you have given those kids a great gift. I say, what are you talking about? You've given them a reason not to use alcohol and drugs. What a great gift. Other kids don't have that. Your kids do, and your grandkids have that. And the reason they don't understand when I say that is because they think that drinking and drug use is a good idea, they just can't do it.
Right.
That's a problem. That's a problem of thinking like that. And again, to me, you know, I like to say I seem to be doing all right in my life without alcohol. It really hasn't been a tremendous burden to me. I don't feel sorry for myself in not drinking. And I think that people who are in recovery need to say that. You know, yeah, I get it, that other people can drink and don't have a problem. But I'm telling you, I'm not drinking and I'm feeling pretty good about it. I don't feel sorry for myself. Well, some people do. I was at, tell one more personal story. So I'm at the Betty Ford Center. Now that's part of the family here. First of all, I was Gerald Ford's white out. And the reason I was there was the 10th anniversary of the founding of the Betty Ford Center. And the reason I was there was because they were dedicating a building to a new person's name, putting on the building. And the person's name on the building was your speaker. So I was there for this event. So when you go to Betty Ford Center, you'll see that. Robert L. DuPont, MD building. So we had a fundraising event or an alumni event where I sat at the head table with Betty Ford, and all our big donors were there, but they're on this 10-person table. And one of the guys said he could never get over the fact that he could never drink. That was unacceptable. So he had a way of thinking about that, and that was that God would help handle this. And when he died and went to heaven, he was going to drink. And I was completely charmed by that, his way of handling that terrible problem that he had. But I'll tell you something else. 2 questions you guys have that you haven't asked me. Number 1, am I related to the rich DuPonts? And the answer is no. It's the most common name in the Paris phone book. It's like Smith in the United States. So I've answered that question. The other question is, how did I get my name on a building in the Betty Ford Center? So you ready?
Yep.
You'd think it had to do with my distinguished career, right? Makes perfect sense. Wrong. You would think it has to do with the fact that I'm Gerald Ford's drug czar. Wrong. Maybe I gave him a bunch of money. No, I'm not in a position to do that. The answer is that I sent a patient to them who was a pretty wealthy guy. He had grown up in an orphanage. And he graduated from high school in this orphanage, and when he graduated from high school at the age of 18, had a high school diploma, they gave him $5 and a toothbrush and said, go get them done. He told me about the story of his work with those kids, other kids. And they sat around and they were eating yesterday's, which was day-old bread that they could afford to buy, cookies and things they could afford to buy. And they all went around and said what they wanted to do. One wanted to be a postman, one wanted to be a teacher. He said, I want to be a rich man. And he did. And I sent him out to the Betty Ford Center. He flew out there in his airplane. And he said, they told me that you told them a little about me when coming out here. I said, yeah, I did. He said, well, they told me you told them that I was a liar. I said, yep, I did. He said, but you were right. And he said that the first thing he did, everybody had an assignment. His job was to clean the toilets, and he had a double room. He says, it's been a while since I've been in a double room. But he loved that. He loved cleaning the toilet. He was very happy. So he gave $1 million to the Betty Ford Center to name a building for Robert L. DuPont.
Wow.
And that was pretty remarkable to think about that. And I was very grateful. So I was talking to John Schwartzlos, who was the head of the Betty Ford Center at the time. And I said, John, I'm really very grateful about this. He says, Bob, don't let it go to your head. He said, for $1 million, we would have called it the Mickey Mouse Building. So we'll end there.